Welcome to the Troy Public Library. I'm Maggie. I'm one of the reference librarians, and I want to thank the Friends of the Library for supporting our program tonight. How our program is going to run is once I introduce Kevin, he will do his program, and during the meantime, if you have questions, please put those down at the bottom for the Q&A, and at the end of the program, I'll read those questions to Kevin. I want to welcome Kevin Kendrick tonight as he presents Inside the FBI, 25 Years to Life. Former Special Agent Kevin Kendrick joined the FBI in 1981 and spent the next 25 years working in virtually every area of investigative responsibilities, including 2 tours of duty at the FBI headquarters. Tonight, Kevin will talk about the history of the FBI, what it is, how it is organized, what they do well, and where there are opportunities for improvement. He will also share some personal experiences, such as testifying before Congress in the Whitewater investigation, and what it was like working with Director Robert Mueller and becoming the first Black special agent in charge for the state of North Carolina. Thanks again, Kevin, and we're real interested to hear your program, so take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Maggie. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all tonight, and I'm just going to start. I hope you can see my screen here. I'll start again by just saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. I call this 25 Years to Life because even though this was a job, I think once you begin working for the FBI, you realize that it's much more than a job, because you spend a good deal of your time with these people, and they in fact become your family. And just like with a family, that's kind of a lifetime commitment. So let me start by talking about the birth of the FBI. So it all began officially in 1908 with the issuance of this memo. I know it's a little difficult to read, but in essence, it's a memo from then Attorney General Charles Bonaparte asking the department of, asking for departmental authorization to institute an investigative arm. There were no agents actually assigned to the Department of Justice at that time. They would literally have to borrow investigators from the Secret Service if they had investigations that needed to be conducted. President Teddy Roosevelt wanted to professionalize that and was looking for actually reform in how federal crimes were being pursued. So this memorandum actually started the Bureau of Investigation. And by March of 1909, the force included 34 agents, had a different attorney general by that time too. And of course, the name of the organization was the Bureau of Investigation. Interestingly, Charles Bonaparte was the grandnephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. It's a little bit of trivia there. So the country was really evolving at that time, 1909, 1910, 1911. We were really in flux. So the Bureau wanted to grow their mission. And in 1910, they were able to do that with the passage of the Mann Act. Now, the Mann Act essentially allowed for investigators to look at crimes involving the interstate transport of women who were involved in prostitution. But the Mann Act actually was interpreted by some jurisdictions a little bit more liberally, and that is they looked at women not just involved in prostitution, but women who were perhaps going across state lines to pursue romantic relationships. And that was the Justice Department's reason for getting involved in some of those cases. Now, in 1917, the mission of the Bureau of Investigation expanded even further with the advent of the first Red Scare. Of course, you had the revolution going on in Europe, in Russia, and communists were seen everywhere. And the Department of Justice got involved in that. The United States had just entered the war, of course, in 1917, and treason and anarchists were the targets of the Bureau of Investigation at that time. So also, the mission grew even a little bit more in 1919. And at that time, this guy here was an escapee from a Virginia military camp. He had been incarcerated for some crime, and he escaped, and the Bureau entered what would be its first identification order. So in effect, this became our first fugitive investigation. Now, there were some firsts in the Bureau at this time as well. In 1922, Alaska Davidson became the first female hired by the Bureau. She was actually let go in 1924 when then Director J. Edgar Hoover said there was no longer a need for women in the Bureau. She was the first, and there would not be another for many more years. And then this individual, James Wormley Jones, who worked in the Bureau from 1919 until 1923, was actually the first Black agent in the FBI. He was a captain in the Army in World War I, had been on the Washington, D.C. Police Department prior to that time. And Wormley was actually very instrumental in the Marcus Garvey investigation, the investigation that actually ended up getting Marcus Garvey in the Back to Africa movement, which is what he was known for, getting him convicted on a mail fraud charge. And then this gentleman, Emilio Kosterlitsky, he was the oldest man ever hired by the Bureau. He was 63 when he was first hired. And because he spoke fluent Spanish, he was used by the Bureau of Investigation on the border and was instrumental in working Mexican informants at that time. So these were just a few of the first in the FBI. The Bureau, again, evolved in the 1920s. Of course, we saw Prohibition come into effect from 1920 until 1933. And with Prohibition, of course, you had organized crime, to a degree, gangs competing for territory. And in New York, this was truly, you saw the beginning of organized crime. Now, the Bureau of Investigation was still relatively young in the early 1920s and had actually a reputation for politicizing investigations. So in 1923, as details of the Teapot Dome scandal that really rocked the Harding administration became clear and became known, the nation learned that the Department of Justice had actually sent Bureau agents to spy on members of Congress who had opposed the policies of the Harding administration. So not long after that became public knowledge, President Calvin Coolidge fired Harding's attorney general, who was a gentleman by the name of Harry Daugherty, and who was intimately involved in the Teapot Dome scandal, and named Harlan Fiske Stone as his successor in 1924. Stone would then name J. Edgar Hoover as the head of the then Bureau of Investigation. So I'm going to go into a little bit here about J. Edgar Hoover. He actually had joined the FBI in 1917 and had worked a little bit at the archives and had a good sense of record keeping and filing, and he knew the power of having records that were retrievable and indexable. So he brought that skill set with him when he joined the Bureau in 1917. And Attorney General Palmer actually put him in charge, Palmer Mitchell, put him in charge of the effort to lead the fight against communism during that first Red Scare. So Hoover hit that, he hit it hard, really violated a lot of people's rights during those days, and but actually succeeded, in making a name for himself as someone who could get things done. Now, he did do some very positive things. He was named director, assistant director in 1921, and director of the entire Bureau in 1924. And his goals were to eliminate cronyism in the organization and to professionalize it. He actually instituted uniform hiring requirements, physical fitness standards, including background checks, which were unheard of prior to that time, and age restrictions. He mandated that agents could only become agents if they were between the ages of 25 and 35. And that's something that's still in existence today. So when he took over in 1924, the Bureau had 650 employees, including 441 agents. Today, we've got about 35,000 employees. I think one of the most significant things that Hoover did was in combining two relatively large reservoirs of fingerprint files and creating what became known as the Identification Division. And they were tasked with gathering fingerprints from all over the country at that time. Of course, the 1930s saw the continuation of lawlessness in this country. And with high-powered cars, you saw the Bureau getting involved in many more of these cases, bank robberies, where funds were taken and the monies were transported across state lines. And of course, the big fugitives of the day, Machine Gun Kelly, John Dillinger, the Barker Gang, they all helped to further the Bureau's mission in that time. And Hoover took advantage of all of this apparent rampant crime. He was a master at manipulating the media and often used the media to glorify and publicize the deeds of the Bureau. One of the things that he did that was particularly significant was the establishment of the National Academy in 1935. Now, the National Academy serves as a training mechanism for police departments from around the country. They get to send their officers, their command officers, back to Washington, D.C. at that time, but now Quantico, Virginia, because the National Academy is still in existence, and they receive courses on police administration, on intelligence. It was just a wonderful way to get police departments more in sync with what the FBI was doing. And then, of course, the 1940s were consumed by efforts to protect the homeland against Germany and Japan. And with the Bureau at that time, fighting saboteurs and communists were definitely the priorities. The Special Intelligence Services, which was an arm of the Bureau, was formed to respond to the growing threat of Nazis in Central and South America. The Bureau sent over 350 employees in covert roles to these geographies. And it was interesting. There was a little bit of a turf war going on, too, between the Bureau and our counterparts over in England, who didn't want the Bureau agents working over there. So they started working with what was to be the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which would later become the CIA. They preferred to work with them as opposed to the FBI at that time. And this was really a confusing time for the Bureau, too, because the Soviet Union was ostensibly our ally, of course, in World War II. And this gentleman here, Vasily Zubulin, was the cover name for the second secretary of the Soviet Union. In 1943, the Bureau received a tip that he was actively working to secure information relating to the Manhattan Project, which, of course, was all about the atomic bomb and our efforts to construct that. And electronic surveillance would later confirm that he was, in fact, involved in that. But this really put the Bureau in kind of a confusing position. It also, though, helped to cement Hoover's really negative feelings toward everything communist. So the 1950s and the 1970s saw a host of changes in the Bureau. We saw the advent of civil rights cases coming on board as one of our investigative responsibilities. organized crime became a priority for us as well. That was something that the Bureau really was forced to kind of get involved with because of a meeting in upstate New York where a whole host of organized criminals got together at a place called Appalachian in 1957, and a wealth of information was uncovered about organized crime activities at that time by the New York State Police. So it really compelled the Bureau to get involved in looking at organized crime, which Hoover had actually said didn't exist prior to that time. And then, of course, domestic counterintelligence, which was originally structured to look at security threats to the country, and primarily those involving communists, took off at that time too. This counterintelligence, the domestic counterintelligence, although originally designed to look at communism and investigate communism, quickly grew to look at other threats, and this program was eventually eliminated, stopped, because it was infringing on legitimate First Amendment activities of certain groups. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mr. Hoover, who passed away in May 1972 after serving for director for a period of 47 years. Now, his death was mourned by some and applauded by others. And while he had done a whole lot of good in terms of establishing an investigative arm for the Department of Justice and giving it the structure that it needed, this was clearly a case of a person who stayed in power for far longer than he should have. He used his authority in abusive ways by authorizing unauthorized wiretaps, illegal entries into businesses and homes, and really compiling what amounted to blackmail material against those who opposed him, including politicians. President Truman once said that Hoover transformed the FBI into his private secret police force. And Truman was quoted as saying, "We want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is tending in that direction. They are dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail. J. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him." And that came from the President of the United States at that time. So was he the right man for the job? It depends on who you are. He is still viewed as a hero to a number of agents. When I was on the job, it was not unusual to walk into an office and see his picture still up in some offices. And then I know too that had Mr. Hoover been the director while when I first applied as an agent, I in all likelihood wouldn't have been hired because he just did not make that a priority during his 47-year term. Definitely a mixed legacy, a lot of good, but also a lot of things that he shouldn't have done. And he is the main reason why FBI directors now have 10-year terms. And that's it. You rarely see. Bob Mueller was extended once by President Obama for a few years, but that was due to continuity in some investigations at that time. But for the most part, that's a very limited tenure. And that's one of the results of Mr. Hoover's tenure. So I'm gonna jump into how the FBI morphed into the organization that it is today. And it all changed on September the 11th. Prior to September the 11th, the Bureau focused most of its resources on criminal matters, bank robberies, interstate transportation of stolen property, fugitives, organized crimes, white-collar crime to a lesser degree, drugs also entered into the picture there. Fewer resources were devoted to counterintelligence matters and fewer still to foreign counterintelligence matters. Cyber crimes, of course, weren't even a thing at that time. But 9/11 changed all of that. when we did a postmortem on what we knew and when we knew it, and when all the hearings were said and done, the Bureau had to, frankly, take a step back and say, you know what, we had indicators there that should have helped to inform us that something was going on. All of the markers were there. We just did not have the apparatus, the intelligence capacity to put those dots together. And that's something that we really just had to admit. So overnight, the Bureau morphed into this reactive organization chasing criminals around the country after crimes had been committed, to an intelligence-driven organization, not just for terrorist investigations, but really for all of our investigations. Intelligence drives everything that we do. And our mission and vision and priorities all changed after 9/11. Now, you got to remember, Director Mueller had only been on the job for about a month. And he let the field offices know that we could never again fail to connect the dots. We had to make great use of our intelligence resources, and our mission and vision and priorities reflected that. Our mission changed to protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution of the United States. The vision, ahead of the threat. That means being in front of it, not reacting to things, but actually trying to determine what's going on and stopping it, going right back to this mission of protecting the American people. And then our mission priorities change. Number one, protecting the U.S. from terrorist attack, protecting the U.S. against foreign intelligence, espionage, and cyber operations, combating significant cyber criminal activity, combating public corruption, protecting civil rights, combating transnational criminal enterprises, combating significant white-collar crime, and then finally combating significant violent crime. These were all big changes for the Bureau. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what intelligence means and what our role in the intelligence community is. These are all of the components that make up today's current intelligence community. There's lots of confusion about what the FBI is and what our jurisdiction is. It's actually our intelligence branch. The Bureau has an intelligence branch, a national security branch, a criminal and cyber branch, and a science and technology branch. Those are the four main branches. But it's our intel branch that has the responsibility for participation in the intelligence community. We are not the CIA. A lot of people think that we are, but the CIA, although we have an intelligence responsibility, you can see this is the CIA seal here. Our investigative authority is criminal in nature and extends only to the U.S. and U.S. territories. The CIA is an intelligence gathering agency with the responsibility to collect intelligence overseas, not within the United States. They also have a responsibility to carry out covert operations as directed by the president. We are not the Secret Service. The Secret Service protects the president and other dignitaries and has jurisdictions over certain types of financial fraud. We're not the ATF. They've got responsibility for violations involving firearms and explosives. And we are not the DEA, which has responsibility for violations involving controlled substances. We are the primary investigative responsibility or body for the Department of Justice. We have investigative responsibility for some 300 criminal matters. So that's the difference between the Bureau and all of those other agencies. And now, starting out for me, this is kind of where it started. I had worked for the Wayne State University Police Department for a year before joining the Detroit Police Department in 1977. Certainly that picture wouldn't strike fear into the hearts of many people. In January of 1981, I worked for the police department for 4 years and then was able to get hired by the Bureau in October of 1980, but didn't start until January of 1981. And this is, of course, an overview of Quantico, where we do all of our training. I would spend the next 16, 18 weeks there. This was my graduation picture, the day of my graduation, and I've got some family members here with me. And of course, I was on my way to my first office, which was the Detroit office. At that time, agents went back to the office that they hired into, and they would spend roughly a year there before getting transferred to their next office. So I got sent to Detroit. This was the office building, the Patrick V. McNamara building in downtown Detroit on Michigan Avenue. We occupied the top 2 floors. And when I was first assigned to the office in Detroit, I was assigned to a counterintelligence squad. Didn't really want to do that because working on a counterintelligence squad, excuse me for 1 second, I'm going to take a sip of water. I was assigned to this counterintelligence squad, and I was only on this squad for 1 week. And then I got transferred to a bank robbery and fugitive squad. And I couldn't understand why I was only on there for a week. Well, I was told later, because counterintelligence cases usually involve sitting on wiretaps. What are wiretaps? And at that time, our wiretapping room for the counterintelligence squad was very close to where criminal cases were also had their wiretap room. So there was a very, very significant public corruption case involving the Detroit Police Department that was ongoing on one of the criminal squads while I was there. And while they trusted me, I'd gone through the background investigation. They didn't necessarily want to compromise that case by having me in proximity to that very important criminal investigation that was going on. And it was actually wonderful because as a new agent, the last thing I wanted to do was sit on a wire. So I was assigned to the bank robbery fugitive squad. I had my first arrest there as an FBI agent. I'd had many arrests as a police officer, but my first arrest as an FBI agent involved an unlawful flight to avoid confinement case. The person I was looking for was a prison escapee, and it was an old case. This guy had been an escapee for about 4 years, and I thought, well, I'll just start by knocking on his wife's door. So I went to the house, knocked on the door, and his wife didn't answer it, but a guy who looked very familiar did answer. And it suddenly dawned on me that I was actually looking at my fugitive. I was by myself. And fortunately, he didn't resist or anything like that. But I put him under arrest, got another car there, and we got him transported and processed. But it was my first arrest, but it was also my first admonition, because I was instructed, you never, ever, ever go out on arrest by yourself in the Bureau. And of course I knew that, but I just didn't realize that the guy would actually be behind the door when I knocked on it. So valuable lesson learned. One of the big differences between the Bureau and police departments is that police departments are responsive in so many situations. The beauty of being in the FBI is that you get to plan things. When you're out to arrest a fugitive or to do a search warrant, you get to plan those things. You get to plan for contingencies. You know where the nearest hospital is. You get police there to back you up. You have adequate preparations. You know where to station people. You typically, you may even have an overview of the situation so that you know where the escape routes are. You know where the windows on a house are. So you get to do all of this planning. And unfortunately, I didn't do any of that. So lesson learned. I wanted to point out, too, that being Black in the FBI in 1981 was a rarity. There were only about 4% of the agent population were Black at that time. So there weren't a lot of us. When I say the FBI is family, I mean it. I was on the SWAT team too in Detroit, and this was one of the finest group of people I ever associated with. They were all wonderful people, and several of these gentlemen are no longer with us. This guy here, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving. His name was Bill Christian. Bill actually ended up going to the Oakland Resident Agency, which is covered. That's where the Troy Library is. But Bill would be killed in a surveillance that he was conducting after he got transferred from Oakland to Washington, D.C. He was on surveillance for a fugitive and was killed by the fugitive who actually made him on surveillance. This guy here standing right behind, that's me, but this guy here, Terry McGinnis, was another great agent. He was shot and seriously wounded while trying to apprehend a bank robbery fugitive. He was one of 3 agents shot during that evening, with one agent actually dying. So these guys are your family because you do spend a lot of time with them, and I know that each one of them would always have my back, and that's what makes this kind of a lifetime commitment. So I did my 1.5 years in Detroit. I got sent to Kansas City and received orders in 1982 for Kansas City. And in those days, the Bureau gave you 30 days to transfer. That meant getting your house ready to sell, listing it, going on your house hunting trip, which lasted 5 days, and then making arrangements for housing on the other end. So, of course, there was never enough time. So you frequently ended up leaving your spouse behind in order to just get to your office and get going. Now, the strategy behind Detroit was considered a big office. Kansas City was considered a smaller office. And the idea was to go from a big office where you were working primarily 1 or 2 different kinds of cases to a smaller office where you could gain experience by working a variety of cases. So I was initially assigned to a white-collar crime squad, fraud against the government. I was excited about doing this because white-collar crime is something I'm kind of passionate about. But about a month after being assigned to this white-collar crime squad, the Bureau was granted concurrent jurisdiction with DEA. And I was one of 4 agents that was selected to begin working these drug cases in concert with DEA where we could. But if not, we certainly could have the ability and the authorization to initiate our own cases. And that's exactly what I did. I was actually assigned to Lawrence, Kansas, which had a huge drug problem at that time. Now, the problem in Lawrence, Kansas was they had an applied English center there. So they literally attracted students from all over the world. And as I learned from working with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department, is that they had a huge drug problem there, but not just in usage, but they were seeing quantities of cocaine that were being trafficked in Lawrence. So we put together a case. It was what we call a historical case, but it was largely based on phone records. We did some wiretaps, and we were able to indict 8 people in cocaine trafficking in Lawrence, Kansas, and that was kind of exciting for me with only a couple of years on the job. So, of course, 2 years later, you get moved to another big office, and at that time, Detroit had vacancies, so we came back to Detroit, and this was what would be my 3rd office. I got transferred back there in 1984, and I was assigned then to the property crime squad, responsible for stolen vehicles, thefts from interstate shipments, interstate transportation of stolen property, all good stuff. The expectation as a newer agent was that, you would handle leads from other offices and assist the more senior agents in their cases. I didn't want to do that, though, because Kansas City had helped me to grow as an agent. It had helped me to really challenge myself in terms of how I approached investigations. And rather than just being an assistant on cases, I wanted to really generate my own cases. And the best way to do that is through something called using sensitive techniques. Now, one thing that we knew at the time was that Detroit was the automobile theft capital in the United States. More automobile thefts than any other big city in the world. So I wanted to talk to insurance company representatives and find out what their view of insurance fraud was. We knew that it was a part of the problem. It was a factor, in Detroit's high theft rate, but we didn't know how much. So I met with these insurance companies to determine their issues and how we might be able to assist. The top three insurers, AAA, State Farm, Allstate, advised me that their biggest problem was insurance fraud. They knew that was the reason why Detroit's numbers were as high as they were. So working with them, I was able to identify and develop a couple of informants. And then we started an undercover operation. We called it Operation Steam Clean, where we would represent to people who wanted to give up their cars for insurance fraud purposes. We would make them disappear. So this is what happened. We ended up a few years later charging 170 people in this automobile theft insurance fraud. There were a variety of people who were charged. So many of these cases there were a lot of people from Detroit who were fraudulently reporting their cars stolen, but there were also a lot of people from the suburbs who were saying that their cars were stolen in Detroit, and they actually weren't. Of course, none of these cars were stolen. We actually ended up charging a couple of lawyers. We had 3 police officers that were charged as well. This had a major impact on automobile theft insurance fraud because it actually decreased by 30% the next year. And we think a large part of that was due to the publicity that this case received. People didn't think that just lying to your insurance company could be a federal crime, but it was. And of course, the charges here involved mail fraud because people would mail in statements relative to a theft that had never occurred. We, in fact, were in constructive possession of the vehicles at the time that they were given up, and we could show that we had constructive possession of them. We did that because when the people turned over their cars, they would turn over the title. We would take the title, we would mark it, we would give it back to our middleman, who was a tow truck driver or the person who was operating our chop shop, if you will. And they would mail that document into the insurance company. So that's how we were able to convict as many people as we did. In this case, actually, is what inspired me to get involved in management at the FBI. I saw that rather than reacting to crimes, we could actually be in front. We could actually lead in this effort by talking to the subject matter experts, if you will, and determining what the crime problems were. So based on that case, I applied for a job back at our headquarters. And this, of course, is the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C. There's 2 ways to become a manager in the FBI. You can have a field promotion. You can be promoted as a supervisor. That's actually what happened to me in Detroit. I was promoted to a field supervisor after Operation Steam Clean. Or you can go to headquarters. So I took a lateral transfer to headquarters because I wanted to do more work in the area of white collar crimes. Being a headquarters supervisor is really like no other experience. Your job is to be an advocate for the field offices you have responsibility for. So I was in the financial institution fraud unit. There were 4 of us, and we split the country up into quadrants. I had responsibility for a part of the country that contained our Little Rock office. It was kind of the southeastern quadrant of the country. But that's not all you do. You have to also respond to what seemed to be just an incredible number of congressional inquiries from different Congress folks and different committees. You have to effect liaison with other agencies that have financial institution responsibilities, the regulatory agencies like the FDIC, the federal, what was then the Federal Savings Loan Insurance Company, banking and loan advocacy groups, FinCEN, international agencies. You have to effect liaison with all of those entities, and then of course the requests from Congress take priority over anything. So you're really not able to be as much of an advocate for the field offices as you would like to be. I wanted to show you a little bit of how the FBI is organized. This is really today, not so much in my time, but today, of course, you have the director, the deputy director, the director's chief of staff. All of the SACs in the field respond to the deputy director, who of course reports up to the director. You've got all of these various offices over here, and these were the branches that I was talking about earlier. We've got an executive assistant director for intelligence here, an executive assistant director for national security, and executive assistant director, EADs, as we call them, for criminal and cyber matters, and an executive assistant director for technology and science. So this is where the work gets done. These various directors here, you got a director of intelligence, counterterror for that division, counterterrorism division, criminal investigative division, cyber division. All of these entities have are broken up into sections, and then the sections are broken up into units, and those units are headed by what I was, a GS-14 supervisory special agent. So you can see where we kind of rank in the pecking order, pretty low. So that's kind of a quick peek. So here I am. I'm in the financial institution fraud unit of the criminal investigative division at that time, and I'd been at headquarters all of really about 2 weeks when I got in this letter. It was actually a criminal referral form from what was then known as a Resolution Trust Corporation. They were an oversight agency dealing with savings and loans. And this criminal referral came in. Most criminal referrals are 1 or 2 pages. They were at that time. This one came in because it was multiple pages. Again, we were just surprised by the size of this criminal referral more than anything else. And it had been sent to the Eastern District of Arkansas, to the U.S. Attorney there. And we, of course, had been copied on this. So as you can see, it's a little hard to see, but this says between February 1984 and July 1987, James McDougal, Susan McDougal, Anspaugh, Jim Guy Tucker, Stephen Smith, Bill Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, other individuals who are as yet unidentified, were principals in at least one and possibly more of the following companies, and then they give a list of the companies. So this criminal referral form goes on to allege that that all of the principals here were involved in suspected criminal activity. Well, again, this thing is dated August 31st. We got it in September. And what else was going on in 1992 at that time? Well, I'll tell you what was going on. This guy, Bill Clinton, of course, was running for president. So we are literally about 2 months away from the election, and we get in a criminal referral form naming the Democratic candidate as a potential suspect in this fraud investigation. One of the things that I did was, of course, immediately tell my boss, who said, we need to get an opinion from the Department of Justice. And we went across the street. We got to brief the Assistant Attorney General for the DOJ Criminal Investigative Division at that time, and his name was Bob Mueller. After thinking about this for a little bit, Mr. Mueller said, look, we're going to do a very limited investigation into this. And this is what he essentially said. This is a communication that was sent back to the Little Rock office. And it essentially said, look, you're authorized to do what limited investigation you can do to determine the veracity of this, but you can't do anything that would rise to the surface and possibly let out the information that Bill Clinton is under investigation. Now, Mr. Mueller took that position because that was long-standing Department of Justice policy at that time, never to do anything that might jeopardize the outcome of an election. Of course, we know what happened a few years later, and I'm not going to comment on that, but that's what this communication specified. They could do limited background investigation to see if there was anything to it. After the election, we could do whatever, but we weren't going to do anything to possibly queer that election. And I'm sharing all this information. This is all unclassified information. I'm not sharing anything here that you can't find out for yourself. So wanted to make sure that everyone knows that. Now, of course, we were criticized roundly for not revealing the nature of this prior to the election. And I would personally go on to provide several depositions and testify before subcommittees. I had to provide written statements. I testified before the full Whitewater Committee as to the role the Financial Institution Fraud Unit played in these times, and I swore to all of that, and everything I said was the truth. So that's why nothing ever came out of the Whitewater hearings, because we did everything according to DOJ policy at the time, and we took no sides as it related to the election, of course. So now we have an opportunity where we've got a new director coming in September 1993. Louis Freeh comes in. He's a former FBI agent and assistant U.S. attorney. He was appointed director of the FBI by President Clinton. And one of his initiatives was to downsize FBI headquarters and have more agents investigating cases. So he offered these, what were essentially buyouts for supervisors at headquarters, and hundreds of agents were literally moved out of headquarters. This was considered a voluntary demotion with no restrictions on re-entering the management program. And at first, it was a blow to my ego, a huge blow. Going back to being an agent again and investigating cases. But I didn't realize what a gift this was. This really gave me the opportunity to go back and to learn what it was like again to be an agent, to have responsibility for investigating and documenting your cases, for developing informants, for just feeling the stressors that go into being an agent. And I think that experience really helped to prepare me not only for subsequent positions in the FBI later, but it gave me great value in my life. It really put things back into perspective for me. So I became a manager again, largely because of the work that I was able to do on the Oklahoma City bombing. As an agent, I was one of 4 agents that was assigned to what was then called the Oak Bomb case. Of course, that had Detroit connections, Detroit FBI office connections, because of the Nichols brothers and Tim McVeigh and the farm that they would visit periodically to blow things up. But just working on that case gave me the opportunity to re-enter the management program, and I was very grateful for that. So when I became a manager, again, it was on the old bank robbery squad and Oakland County resident agency. There's some days that this happened when I was the supervisor of the bank robbery squad in Detroit. We got an alarm that there was a bank robbery in progress. We responded to this Comerica Bank, and it turned out this is the guy who actually ended up killing 3 people in this what we thought was a bank robbery, but as it turned out, it was not a bank robbery at all. It was just he had a deal going with the manager of the bank, and the manager of the bank was cutting off the relationship, and he was frustrated and came back, actually killed these 3 people, and he was killed by responding Detroit police officers. I share this with you because this thing had an impact on so many people. Every employee in this bank had to undergo counseling. They hid in the basement for an extended period of time. They saw their coworkers being murdered in front of them. It was a terrifying experience. The security guard was actually found 24 hours after the fact, hiding in a place that we couldn't figure any human could ever get into. She was literally squeezed into an HVAC area that was about 8 inches wide, and we still don't know how she was able to get in there, but she did, and she spent the night in that place. It was an incredibly horrifying situation, and these lives were impacted forever. That bank closed. That bank branch closed. They took the decision not to reopen it because of the impact that it had on people. And I share this with you to say that every single day in the FBI is a different day. There were no 2 days that were alike. I was happy to go from the bank robbery squad to where you all are located now. The Bureau has 56 field offices around the country. Each field office has satellite offices that are called resident agencies. And our office in Troy was one of the office's largest resident agencies with about 20 agents and several support staff as well. Leading an RA, as they're called for resident agency, is really important because you're the primary point of contact for the police departments and the town officials as well as the medias. And of course, Oakland County, big population, about 1.2 million at the time, headquarters to several large manufacturing and technology concerns. It was an awesome job. I loved the time that I got to spend in the Oakland County RA. I'm going to share a little bit with you on how a field office is set up now. You have the special agent in charge sitting here at the top. He or she is assisted by typically 3 ASACs. It may be 2, it may be more than this, it may be 4 or 5, but they're typically divided up into cyber and criminal crimes, counterintelligence, terrorism, admin, intelligence, and then they have supervisors working for them. They'll have some resident agency supervisors working for them as well. We have an ASAC over here for admin and intelligence as well, as I mentioned, and they have responsibility for field intelligence groups, some RAs as well. So 9/11 again happened. We were actually undergoing a field office inspection. We have an inspection staff that comes out every 3 or 4 years, and we were actually undergoing an inspection when 9/11 happened, and we went into investigative mode right away due to our proximity to Dearborn, and our command post went up. We worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 10 months as a result of everything that happened during 9/11. And then after 9/11, I had an opportunity to go back to headquarters. 2002, I was promoted to the ranks of the Senior Executive Service as head of the Executive Development Selection Program. In that capacity, I met with Director Mueller at least once a day because he was intent on making changes in our transfers and in how we groomed our special agents in charge, and he was very, very much a hands-on person. I was promoted again in 2003 to Deputy Assistant Director at headquarters, and after 18 months, I began applying for special agent in charge positions as I was entitled to do at that time. And I actually finished first in Springfield, first in Portland, first in Louisville, and my wife and I were just talking about where do we want to go? Because typically when you finish first in a package, you get to go where you want to go. So we decided that let's go to Louisville. It's close to Detroit and close to home for both of us. And, you know, we'll be happy there. Well, Director Mueller had other plans. This is the best view of headquarters, by the way, your rearview mirror. Director Mueller said, look, you need to stay here another 6 months. I got some things you need to do. And when you're done with that, you can become SAC wherever there's a vacancy. And I said, deal. So that was it. I actually did end up with the best job in the FBI. I was appointed the SAC for Charlotte, North Carolina in 2004. I was the first Black special agent in charge at that point. North Carolina is really different. We have 3 judicial districts. Michigan has 2, the Eastern District and the Western District. Well, there are 3 here in North Carolina, which means you have to deal with 3 different U.S. attorneys, and 3 different sets of judges, and it's really a lot of fun. I had 120 agents, 150 support personnel, 80 task force officers assigned here. We had some of the biggest banks in America, and my emphasis was on growing our community outreach efforts, not only because having those relationships are important, it's how you learn about things that are going on in the community as well. So I was really happy there 2004. And then in 2006, I got a call that said from our deputy director who said, Kevin, you can't sit in Charlotte for the rest of your career. I'm right at 50 years old at this point, and there's no way that Jenny and I were going to go back to DC for a round 3. So we decided to call it quits in May of 2006. But before that happened, I just wanted to point out what was possibly my most challenging day in the FBI. Some days it's just not a lot of fun being the agent in charge because the buck really does stop where you are. So in 2005, April 2005, this all happened, by the way, in April, one day in April 2005. My chief legal counsel was arrested by the Inspector General for some various charges around financial disclosures and inappropriate association with an informant. Guy was really highly respected and regarded by everyone in the office, a great guy, and just he was arrested. I had people in my office who told me that they were going to show up at his initial appearance and that they were going to show up in force to show their support for him. And I told them in no uncertain terms that that was not going to happen unless they were on leave. They could not use government time to go over there and try to intimidate the prosecutors because we have to let justice be justice. We can't make decisions about where cases are, and no matter how well you think you know someone, you just have to let justice take its course. And that was my message to them. Sure enough, at his initial appearance, there were about 40 FBI agents and personnel at the initial appearance. And I get back to the office, I get a call from this guy, Jesse Jackson, who says, hey, how come you're not out here at this cross burning? Because a cross has been burned on this interracial couple's lawn and the FBI is nowhere to be seen. So I had my morning at the courthouse. I'm running out to this location to see Jesse Jackson, who was in town for a Bank of America shareholder meeting. And while I'm there, I get a call from this guy who's asking me about why 40 agents were in the courtroom for the initial appearance. This guy is chewing into my other ear about why the FBI is not on scene. So I explained to both gentlemen that, these folks were there, they were on leave. Jesse took me aside later and said, hey, this really isn't personal, but I just have to make you guys look kind of bad because that's what I do. But when I got home that evening, I told my wife, this is sustainable. This isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. This, however, is what it's all about for me. These were just some of my signs, placards when I was in the bureau. This is one of the one of the awards I'm most proud of. It's hard to see, but this is an award that came from the disabled community. When I was in our FBI headquarters, we had some things that had gone unaddressed in terms of wheelchair ramps and restroom openings and little simple things, parking, that just had not been done. And even though we're the FBI and we have responsibility for civil rights, and we weren't taking care of our own people. So I got this award from the disabled community in our own FBI headquarters, and it meant the world to me. As you can see, this is just an assortment of some of my business cards. This is coincidentally, I didn't rearrange these, but this was my business card for the time that I spent in the Troy office of the FBI, which was appropriately on Crooks Road. I have no idea if it's still there or not. But this is really what it's all about for me. This was a note that I got on the occasion of my retirement from an elementary school student, and I admonished him about where to put these dashes when you're breaking up words, but he didn't understand that. This is my son. He was on the cover of this magazine. He's now a Charlotte Mecklenburg police officer, but this was taken in 1984. This is what the Bureau's about. It's really all about our family, all about the kids, because they represent the future. And just a little history on my badge here. I found out that my badge was actually worn. We recycle badges in the Bureau. My badge number was 2666, and I learned that my badge had been worn by an agent who was involved and who had, in fact, arrested a Russian spy back in the 1950s. And then just continuing the legacy of the Bureau. I'm very much involved in Rotary now. When my wife and I were living in Midland, we had a chance to take these 3 exchange students back to the office in Detroit. And the people there were kind enough, gracious enough to give us a tour of the office. And it was just great fun. They got a kick out of spending the day at the office. This one here was from Argentina. This one was from France. This one was one of our own Midland residents who was on her way to Singapore. So it's fun to be able to do things like this. When I retired from the Bureau, this was the retirement plaque I was presented. You can see that my credentials actually say special agent. Now, I had the opportunity for them to say special agent in charge, supervisory special agent, but I wanted them to say what is most important to me, and that is my job as a special agent. I will always see myself, no matter what the title was, as an agent. Stepping back, taking that demotion, and then having to re-engage as an agent was a terrific experience to me. And I wanted my credentials, my retirement credentials, to reflect that. One of the best experiences of my lifetime, to be sure, certainly more than a job. This was all about family, all about teamwork, all about country. When you take that oath of office as an FBI agent to uphold what the Constitution says we are responsible for, we take it very seriously. And I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. So that's all I have. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you tonight. I will end this and entertain any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. That was so interesting. The first question we have, I think you kind of answered this. It says, what is SAC?
Yes. Special agent in charge.
And the next question is, what kind of education, experience, and personal lifestyle are required to be hired into the FBI today?
It varies. It really varies. Of course, you have to have at least a 4-year degree, but typically there's more that's required. The Bureau handles hires according to needs. Right now, we're looking for people who are engineers, people who have science backgrounds, people who have different language skills, specifically Chinese, Russian, Farsi. Those are the types of skill sets. People who have an intelligence background. If you've been in the military and you've served time in any kind of intel capacity, you'll likely have a good chance of being hired by the FBI. They are incredibly selective. When I was in our personnel division, one year that we hired 700 agents, we had 100,000 applications. So they're very selective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other questions? Oh, here's one. It says, what do you think of what Comey said about Hillary Clinton before the election? It seems Mueller would not have done that.
Yeah, I don't want to really get into any discussion about that, but I don't think that the Bob Mueller I know would never have jeopardized the investigation. I will say that I was critical of Director Comey who I have a great deal of respect for, by the way. I worked with him as well. I have a great deal of respect for him, but I think he made a mistake by releasing that information.
Okay, just a lot of nice comments about your presentation.
Thank you.
And I think, is there anything else here? No, just thank you for your service, and it was an excellent presentation.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated it. And again, when you leave the program, if you could fill out the surveys, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks again. And thank you, Kevin. It was very interesting. And thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. Be safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.